So, you forgive me? The letter I write.
He says yes, he forgives you. There's nothing. There's nothing bothering him or.
Yeah.
He says it's good when you ask the questions. He says it's quite helpful because a lot of people they don't ask questions. So if you ask a question, you might feel, oh, why am I asking all these questions or something? But it's actually helpful for other people to hear Dhamma, and he doesn't think it's a problem or an issue or anything.
Yeah. But anyway, I still like an answer to that question.
What is the question?
What's the question? He asked me, he said, who's the question? That is not my question. What's the question?
What's the question? The question is the answer.
What I mean is that, why the question arises, and will the answer be able to quiet this mind from questioning?
The question arises out of ignorance. No, the answer arises from knowing, from understanding, wisdom.
So it's not ignorance?
No, the question arises from ignorance.
Question. So if I ask too many questions, I seem to be very ignorant.
It's correct. All questions have to come from not knowing the truth, from ignorance. Answers come from wisdom. But in the course of practice, if you keep practicing, you might have questions arise, but then either through your own efforts or through a teacher, you answer those questions, you resolve them, you gain wisdom and understanding. That wisdom might lead to further questions. So you might have to have further answers, but what you're doing is you're developing your wisdom as you go. So it's a perfectly valid way to practice. He was saying there's maybe another way of where people just ask questions out of ignorance and they're not really practicing, so they're not really gaining more insight, more understanding. The questions just keep coming endlessly over and over again. That way it's just an obstacle, a hindrance. But if your questions are leading to wisdom and you're growing in your understanding, that's okay. No more questions?
I got it now. Once it starts, it never ends. So I have to restrain myself. And then other people ask me.
Yeah. He says, one of the important things in practice is to understand your character, your own character. Get to know that, because everyone is different. Character is different. And they talk about, say in the scriptures, they talk about the different kinds of characters. Some people tend towards greed, some towards anger, some towards doubt, some towards worry. And the doubtful type tends to ask a lot of questions. And so if that's your character, it's not something you can really change. It's something you should understand. You just get to know your character. If you do have a lot of questions, that's all right. You just know that's the way I am, that's the way my character is. And if you understand it, you won't have a problem. But if you're sort of fighting or wishing to change your character or fighting against it, well, you have a lot of suffering. Ajahn Chah used to say, having a lot of doubts isn't a problem or an obstacle to the practice. You keep having the doubts, but the thing is you have to also learn to practice to the point where you can answer your own doubts, your own questions. And if you're doing that successfully, that means you know how to practice. Whatever doubt arises, you think about it, you work through it, through your practice, you come to an answer and resolve it yourself. And that's the best solution, obviously.
The Ajahn mentioned about the doubt. It's not the doubt we're talking about the Buddha's teaching. It's not the kind of doubt.
So it's very common to have doubts in the practice, but these doubts, they're not going to necessarily be doubts in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, that nature. It's more just in the techniques, the methods of practice. And it's very common, especially these days, because there's so many teachers, different Buddhist teachers, centres, monasteries, and they have differences of style and the way they approach the Dhamma. It gives rise to a lot of doubts. Some will teach, so you go to Thailand, they'll often teach you to use the mantra Buddho for meditation. You go to Burma, they might say follow the rising and falling of the abdomen, the breath for your meditation technique, and so on, which gives rise to doubt. Said some practitioners have doubts about the kind of technique they should use to develop samadhi. What people who use the contemplation of death, what we call marananusati, just recollecting death as a meditation theme. They go to the scriptures, and the scriptures say, well, you can only achieve upajara samadhi, one level of samadhi. With that, you won't get to jhana, or one-pointedness of mind. So they might think, oh, well, then I can't become enlightened using this method. But one who's practiced will know all these different methods and techniques, they're all bringing the mind to the same point, where the mind becomes peaceful and unified. And you can say you develop your meditation using the upajara, marananusati, a recollection of death. You get through to upajara samadhi. You can continue on. It's not that you sort of just stuck there and stop there. You can continue to develop your samadhi and develop one-pointedness of mind. So that and many other techniques are all very valid techniques. But the only way, to overcome the sort of doubts about techniques, methods, and that is to do the practice. And the more we do the practice and gain experience, then we'll understand, and we'll be getting beyond doubts, ending doubts.
Tanaja, just one more question. There are many techniques you are talking about. So do we stick to one techniques, or you use the different techniques as your mood, according to your mood at that time? Because with all the techniques, the end result is to get the one-pointedness, the calmness. So one day you might feel that doing Buddha, another day you might doing the Anapanasati. So is it okay? So long you get the calm, the result, the end result. So we just aim for the result that we get a one-pointedness, the calmness. That's it, irrespective of what technique you use.
You have to use the method that really works for you, which means one that you're getting results. That's the test, whether it's the good technique. Is it bringing you results, and are you getting more skilled in using that technique to calm your mind? So you have to look back at how your practice is going. What are the results of using any meditation technique? And if you see, I'm getting better at this, more experienced, more skilled at this, then that's a sign you can use it.
But sometimes, you use the same method, you don't get the same calmness the next day, so you use another type. It's okay, isn't it? As I understand.
What you need is a foundation. So if there's one technique that you've used, at least sometimes you've gained peace from that. You should always be returning to that. So if other times you experiment or you want to change, a break from it, depending on the conditions or how you feel or whatever, well, you can do that. But you should always be returning to your main technique. And if you keep returning over and over again, then you'll develop that skill and a foundation.
So that's a very practical question. Before I had Ethan, it's 18 months now, my husband and I lived alone. I found it very easy to, meditate, have regular meditation. Now we've got 2 teenage boys living with us as well, Ethan and my son. And so I'm doing a lot of housework and stuff. When I wake up in the morning, Ethan gets excited and I wakes up as well. So, I think I'm a really bad meditator. So what sort of, for a lot of women are in, I suppose, my position, where they're at home a lot, but they're always busy. A lot of people ask them this or that. What are good ways of reintegrating?
Obviously now you're much more busy. You haven't got that freedom maybe to just choose when you're going to meditate and organise your day so easily. But the basis of practice in daily life when you are busy like this is still to try and use your whatever activities you're doing as a basis for developing mindful awareness. So if you're cleaning or you're feeding the kids or something, or try and make that the focus of your mindfulness. So your mind is focused on that activity, and learning to bring your attention back to the present moment and concentrate on the particular activity you're involved with. Still a valid way to develop awareness, even though it doesn't seem quite the same as sitting cross-legged in the formal way. You can still develop this awareness. And then you just have to sort of find your chance. Maybe there are occasionally little periods of time where your kids are asleep or they're out or something, and you find you've got, I've got a little bit of time today. Well, then you maybe actually sit down and meditate in the way you've done it before, and take a chance while you've got it. But if you don't have it, well, you just carry on developing mindful awareness just with the activities you're doing, looking after the kids, cleaning the house and so on.
I have a lot of responsibilities and I usually get home very late. Is it okay to meditate late at night, like midnight until 2 a.m?
This is an individual thing, so if that's your routine or what's convenient for you works out, that's the best time for you, that's fine. There's no one time that you have to meditate and other times are no good. It's what works for you, what suits you.
I have about the Buddhist approach to change. I know the Buddhists accept that change is inevitable and change is ongoing. But the Buddhists distinguish between good and bad change. And if they think something is a bad change and that people are suffering as a result, should they try and do something about that to change it or turn it around into something better?
Of course, understanding that it's the nature of the world, ourselves and the world around us to be subject to change, that's an understanding that Buddhism teaches that. But how we practice in relation to the different kinds of change that go on in the world or in our lives, well, that will vary. Like you say, there's good and bad change. There's change that we maybe there's nothing we can do about, and then there's changes maybe that we should do something about. So he gave the example, say, our own personal life, the changes in our health and our body. And when we're young, we grow up, we tend to grow fast, and we get strong and healthy in the first part of our lives, which is a change, and you would say a good change. And that's for the good, gives us the strength and us the abilities to do many things in the world. Then over time, as we get older, we experience other kinds of change. Most people generally, the body starts to slow down, degenerate a bit, and becomes more subject to illness and aging. That kind of change, well, one shouldn't just ignore it. One does what one can to help the body to ease it through the changes of old age and sickness, and even slow them down if you can, especially sickness. If you can use medical methods and procedures and remedies, well, that all the better. But there may be later on, you might reach a point where there's nothing you can do. You've got some illness that you just can't shake off or change at all, or aging is so advanced you can't shake it off, can't do much about it anymore. At that point, well, you might have to accept, and this is no longer a change that I can do anything about. Can't slow it down, can't stop it. So at that point, well, maybe the attitude of the way you use the reflection on change is simply to accept, and this is change, and there's nothing much I can do, I'll have to accept this. So it can vary, how we deal with change, our attitudes and what we do with change will vary according to the kind of change and the situation that we're in.
I was thinking also about social changes, if there are changes in society that seem to be bad. I have a lot of people say, oh, that's just progress, that's just the nature of things. You should just accept it. But if it's having negative consequences in people's lives, should we then try and resist that and change what we think it's changing?
Of course, if you see changes, say, in society, in our social attitudes and all these things that are negative and a cause of suffering and creation of suffering for people, well, one should try and do something about it. Especially if formerly we've had something that was good and then gradually it's changing and it's no longer good, it's becoming a source of suffering? Well, one would try to preserve what one had before, the good parts of society, the good attitudes, the good practices of that society. You try and preserve and you try and prevent different practices or attitudes and things coming in. But again, it's similar, we say health, it might reach a point where a certain practice or cultural trend has come to the point where it's just the norm and there's nothing you can do, it's just, it's established. At that point you might have to accept, and this is a change that I don't think is good, but there's nothing I can do about it. You might reach that point.
So I have a problem I suppose I'm struggling with. Before my husband was this is sort of a long one, but I'm not sure. My husband was an environmental activist, still is. And basically I think because it felt like too big a problem and too scary, especially things like climate change, I would sort of, yes, whatever. And then I sort of started doing a bit of that work myself. And now what I'm finding is when I talk to people about things like climate change or those sorts of issues, I think there's two things. First of all, people are afraid, and they also go into despair very quickly without stopping before despair and what can be done. And I think these problems are disturbing a lot of people. But instead of looking at them, they sort of go into distraction very quickly, focusing on your own life, your own problems, your own things. And I think a lot of people find it very hard to communicate those problems and get people to act on them because people have a huge barrier.
He understands what you say. I translated pretty much what you said. You said it's a very common problem, the sort of thing you're talking about for the environmental groups and activists and people concerned about the environment all over the world, not just here. And he says the only thing you can do is just kind of press on with patience and sympathy or understanding that most people in the world are just too caught up in their own personal problems and daily issues and problems, that to take on something bigger like the environment, global climate warming, global changes of different kinds, it's just too big and too far from them. That's why they have this fear or this block. But that doesn't mean to say you give up. You just press on with patience and that understanding that it's going to take time. And you just do what you can to educate people, get them to see that, like you do, that you see the harm that is coming from the way we treat the world and its resources. And you just do the best you can, but with this patience and also with this quality upekkha, which is equanimity based on an understanding that, everyone is at their own level and at their own place in their own personal spiritual development. And, some people might understand about global changes and the environment and climate warming and things, but many people won't, or they're not ready to, and you just have to accept that. And as long as you don't make suffering for yourself out of that, well, you can carry on. Yeah.
Perhaps ask some time about what is the best way to go over the good to sanity, how we approach the feelings and minds, so we don't go into that so something that we feel needs.
You want to know the technique to get to samadhi, to develop samadhi? If you want to develop samadhi or this calmness and peace of mind, the main quality you need to develop is what we call sati, mindfulness, mindful awareness. And all the different meditation techniques are aimed at developing this quality. So like the breathing, maybe developing mindful awareness of the breathing, the feeling of the breath going in and out. The next important quality is to have a continuity of practice, regular practice, frequent practice. It's not something you can just pick up, do once and then leave and then hope to pick it up again and improve. You have to keep doing it regularly. So if you'll keep regularly developing this mindful awareness using a meditation object, technique, what you'll find is you're learning to restrain your mind, gather your mind in, compose the mind regularly through your day. And you'll notice if you let your mind go, you're not practicing mindfulness, well then whatever mood arises, whatever happens in your day, whatever experience you have, well you'll tend to start thinking about it. So you have good things happen where you'll get caught into the pleasure and the happiness and the delight of those good things, and you'll be thinking a lot about them. Bad things happen, you'll be thinking a lot about them, you might get negative thoughts, feel depressed or worried or upset. If there's no mindfulness, that's our experience generally. Our mind is thinking a lot. We call it mental proliferation, proliferating all the time about our experiences. But when you practice mindfulness, you're learning to let that go. So that means you're still aware, or good things happen, well, that's good. Bad things happen, well, that's bad. But you're not letting your mind dwell on that or indulge too much in those experiences. You're just noting them and letting them go. If you do that regularly, you'll see, or if you can practice that in your daily life, your meditation and the experience of peace will become deeper and more stronger and more profound for you. And as you do that, that's giving you this peace, this clarity. That's where you can develop what we call insight or wisdom. And the purpose of the samadhi is to help us to contemplate, to develop insight. And the way we develop insight, maybe just turn the mind to contemplate our own body, our own physical body as a human being, contemplating to see, or it's something that's impermanent. We grow up from being a baby, teenager, middle age, old age, one day we have to die. Literally just turning the mind to contemplate that simple truth that our bodies are subject to change over time, we're changing. And in that sense, to see that the body in itself cannot be a lasting source of happiness for us. And ultimately, it's something that we can't really say we can own or control or keep as ours, as a self forever, because one day it has to die. This is where insight or wisdom arises when you meditate, just contemplating in this way. So when you do become peaceful, he said, turn to contemplate your body in this way, see it as something is impermanent, and this is how wisdom arises in the practice.
Mine's a practical one. My mother's 89, living in a half-level house and independent to a large degree, but has a lot of needs, nevertheless. And I have one sister who is only telephonically involved, so I can get phone calls where my mother will say, can you just drop everything and pop over here? For her just to pop over. And that's fine. And it means that for me, if I need to work for money to provide for the family, I can't. So that's one arm of it. And the other things are that to be able to do what I need for family and even friends at times, but mainly family, and their immediate needs, they're not wants. I'm caught in a real dilemma of, I feel very torn, and I start driving on guilt and all sorts of non-constructive negative emotions, and the resentment starts rising, and then I feel bad that my resentment is there because I'm thinking that's my mother, but I'm torn between the people who I have my obligations to. Now, it is a situation which has to eventually, Mum's determined to stay behind wherever she's living because of her attachment to it. But my question, I guess, would be how I could better, advice on how I could better live with that situation without, I do try not to allow all the things to rise, but there's a better way. Again, I just do what I have to do when I can, whether I can or not. So, is there any advice that Ajahn could give me on how to deal with that situation generally? It's a pretty generic question.
Probably the best advice you can give is that if you're going to help anyone in life, you also have to be aware that you have to help yourself at the same time. difficult to help others if you're already suffering yourself or unhappy yourself. So you start with yourself. In terms of looking after your mum, we all know it's our duty to give something back to our parents because they've helped us since we were born. That's a duty that anyone with any intelligence, awareness will recognise and accept when you have that duty. But our family is also our duty. You have a husband, you have children. That's a duty that you also can't avoid or deny. It's there as well. So this is where you have to get it clear. You get the clarity in that your basic intention is to perform whatever you can to fulfill these duties towards parents, towards family, and towards yourself. You start with your own intention always to get that intention established, that your aim is just to do the right thing, the good thing for your family, for your parents, for yourself. Then in the course of doing that, well, obviously there'll be conflicting demands made on you. Sometimes you have to be in 3 places at once or whatever. And you might find sometimes you just can't do everything that you set out, or that sometimes you're lacking somewhere and you didn't complete something you wanted to do because you didn't have the time or the resources to do it. You have to accept that. It'll be like that. But that's not damaging your underlying intention. That's just learning how to deal with the difficulties of your situation. And the thing to do is not create further suffering, further problems by, self-criticism, feeling guilty and all of that. It's just to always return to your basic intention, which is to help everyone do the right thing, do your duty, and just do it the best you can. If you do make a mistake or you're lacking somewhere, you have to sit down and say, well, how can I improve on that? Maybe next time I'll do it differently, do this, do that. And you just do your best to learn and to try and divide your time. But always come back to your basic intention. Look after your mind, keep that in a positive space, then do whatever you can amongst those different duties that you have.
I noticed that increasingly I'm looking inward now, like any the transition in my body. Instead of looking out contemplatively, I'm looking more inwards. And the mind just stay there, not interested in saying that doing what they call that, the concentration or whatever. Just stay there and feel the sensation. And I realized that, that as I did that, you feel the chest area like a lot of strong movement. What we call it vibration. But physically it's still. And this is happening when I do my meditation regularly. And last night, when I was asleep, in the middle of the night, I was woken up by this vibration in this area. So, am I on the right path, or should I move to contemplation more?
Yeah, he says he thinks you're practicing correctly. Maybe in the past you've been more interested to contemplate, think and know things about the Dhamma and more external things. Now your faith is increasing, you're turning your mind more into inwardly to practice meditation, so naturally you get these different feelings, experiences coming up as the mind is quietening down. So there's nothing to concern yourself there, you're practicing correctly.
So I keep doing that. Is it that now whatever arises, you just know it and that's good enough. You don't have to go and investigate why, what, or impermanence, or this. It's just knowing that that's good enough.
Yeah, that's enough. Just whatever arises, just note it and then let it go. The idea is to keep returning to the mind itself, keep letting go of everything else, and this is the way samadhi develops. The mind will become peaceful.
So it's still in the samadhi, not the vipassana. Will the wisdom arise from that? It will.
Yeah.
So the mind knows what to do. So you don't have to go and say, this is anicca, this is dukkha. You don't have to have this kind of thing.
The insight that we're aiming to develop in the practice is what we call pavana maya panya. And this is knowing the truth as opposed to just thinking about the truth. And in the beginning our wisdom develops, we hear the Dhamma, we read Dhamma books and we think about it. We just think about it, what's this, what's that, and we intellectualize and we think about it. But that's not yet true insight. It's just thinking about the Dhamma. It's still useful and it's a necessary step on the path, but it's not yet true insight. When the mind becomes peaceful with samadhi, then you're able to know anicca, dukkha, anatta without having to think about it. You're knowing it or seeing it clearly through your experience at that point. Say the mind starts to think about something, your mind is peaceful with samadhi, and then some mental proliferation starts. Instead of believing in it and following it, getting lost in it, you can just see it as anicca, dukkha, anatta, and you can let it go quite naturally and quite easily.
So with this vibration in especially this area, sometimes in the meditation or in the middle of the night, or it can happen any time. Is it a kind of element or it just body explode, like going to be exploded?
Says, don't worry, there will be no explosion. It's just the mind itself, the mind gathering together, and it's a new experience. So obviously you've noticed it, and it's sort of causing you to wonder what it is. But it's just the mind gathering together. It's nothing to worry about or concern yourself about. He uses the word waking up. The mind is waking up from its former state of delusion and attachment. The mind is waking up or coming out of that a little bit. So there's a bit of energy there. Maybe what you say is a vibration. It's sort of a sense of more energy, more alertness, more wakefulness.
Is it why that last time I told you that every time when I meditate, my blood pressure goes up?
If that's really the experience, you do have to be a bit careful. If your blood pressure is going up, it's a sign you're probably trying too hard, trying to force your mind and trying too hard, and you need to relax. If that's what's happening, then maybe check your blood pressure from time to time. But if that's what's happening, it's a sign you're making your meditation stressful. You're trying too hard, wanting too much, maybe. You need to relax.
With the anicca, dukkha, anatta, is at first the understanding comes first, and then later on with the clarity of mind, the understanding would be more profound. Is that what happens? Like now I started to understand when the suffering comes up, and then you start to understand the nature of it with some incident or something like that. And later on, with practice, will it be more clearer? Is that how it starts?
Yes, that's correct. Our understanding, our insight at first tends to be just thinking, seeing something, realizing about the truth, but more on a superficial way. But then it becomes more deeper to the point where the mind or the heart is just knowing these truths. That's the point where we call it bhavanamaya panya, where there's the deep insight which can actually uproot defilements, actually allow you to completely let go of delusions and greed and anger. That's the point where you can see the Dhamma.
Only it happened in the last year. When I sit and start to calm down, I cannot slouch. There is like a push in the spine, and your body goes up. Am I imagining, or it's part of the practice?
Yeah, that's the correct thing. That's a natural development of the mind. The arising of more peaceful states of mind gives energy to the body as well.
It's not the energy.
Probably several months ago, I can't remember how long, basically, like the lump was found in my body. And so for 3 days I had cancer testing, and so for 3 days I was really afraid. But, it was okay, I sort of walked the dog and things like that. And then after that, but at the time I realised that nothing that I was doing was terribly important. Nothing in my life was all about either getting another degree or, basically doing something to make myself important in the world, I suppose you put it. And that wasn't actually the last on any level. And then after that, that's when I realised that what I was really concerned with was not so much that, was like I said, environmental issues. That was my biggest concern. Especially because it affects everyone and Ethan and a lot of other people. And so for about 3 weeks I woke up and every day I was very afraid. Not very afraid, but every day I sort of felt, I suppose I felt that fear and sense of despair, but I didn't really want to not feel it either. So I sort of didn't try to, I suppose I did try to get away from it so much. And then after 3 or 4 weeks it went away. And that's when I started doing things, more active things in the community. And since then I felt really happy. And it's kind of the happiness that's always there. And so I suppose I don't really understand why. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah. I think probably just your experience is helping you to understand more deeply what real happiness is. And that, many people find this when faced with the possibility of death. Then you start to see, well, what's really important, where is the real happiness in life? And it's not in so much of these more external things, superficial things. It's to do with your state of mind and developing that and developing goodness in your mind. And part of the way we develop goodness is helping others, so helping the environment, helping the family, the kids. You're just seeing that more clearly, so you're more in touch with happiness and the roots of happiness. That's seems to be what you're describing.
It's a sort of a steady feeling. Like, I'm just wondering, is that like, how, like when you realise a lot of things are going to end, is the thing that lasts those kind of roots of happiness?
It's kind of inner happiness, yes, it gives us a steadiness, and it's very much the stepping stone in, say, one's personal spiritual development. One has to have a source of nourishing the mind. So one has this happiness that comes from just recognizing what's important with the world, say, looking after the environment, looking after other people, looking after the family, and also one's own personal meditation. It very much helps that. It's something to recollect. So, like said, if you meditate, you can recollect when you meditate the good that you've done and the happiness that you've experienced and developed through your good actions. It's a very natural way to make the mind feel calm and peaceful or steady. It's a steadiness of mind. And one can do that as one meditates. Just recollect, good actions, good deeds, good acts that one's done in the past, and doing, even just say today, what have I done today? And you'll find as your mind becomes more aware, there are many good things you're doing, often without realizing, but now you're actually recollecting them, you become more aware of them, and you feel good for that. It's a source of happiness.
You all need a race. You all need a race. Thank you for organizing this big event, and all the Sangha and all the senior teachers for coming as the teaching us, and the Su family. Thank you very much. Yes. Answer one more question. Shots first sometimes.
You can have your question, it's all right. What's your question?
I was thinking, that when we do Dhamma, we can always marry. And that's what we did. I think in the past we must have done a lot of people married. But how come we end up like that? That how to do the Dhamma in such a way that you will end up in his...
Don't want to be like him. It's very easy antidote or protection against any becoming like that person or anyone in that situation. It's just keep your sila. If you keep sila, keep the 5 precepts even if you can become very rich, super rich, you won't be creating suffering for anyone else or yourself. You use those guidelines at any level of society, in any situation in society. Those are guidelines that you can use.
It's not because the way when he offered Dana, he had a bad thought, he wanted something that created this kind of mental state.
So it's the important quality for anyone is panya, wisdom and understanding. And as we, all of us, as we improve ourselves in our practice, we do dana, we keep the precepts, we meditate, all of us are going to improve and benefit from this. Maybe it will bring us some wealth, some better material situation, it will bring us some happiness, and anyone is the same. This person you're talking about could have been the same. That will happen. But as you become wealthier, more powerful, more influential, you need the wisdom to cope with that situation. Because it's not like you do dana, you become more wealthy, you're necessarily or automatically going to be wise with that. You could become more deluded, or you can have more anger arise, more greed arise, especially if you have a lot more wealth, more power, or there's a lot of temptation there. The important thing is to have wisdom and see what you're doing, see whether it's causing you suffering. And he says a lot of prime ministers, politicians, big businessmen and that, they have a lot of suffering. So automatically you have a lot of money and power that you're going to have a lot of happiness. It doesn't always go like that. The important thing to have happiness is to have wisdom. If you have wisdom and mindfulness, well, you can keep your own kilesas which cause you suffering, you can keep them in check. That's the important thing to aim for. If you're you were saying if you make merit, you don't want to be like that. Well, make merit, do good things, develop yourself in a good way, and develop your mindfulness and your wisdom, and you'll be okay. It'll protect you from falling into greed or anger or delusion. Okay, yeah.
During the Buddha's time, when he was enlightened, in the sutta they say the earthquake moved. Yeah. I was wondering, is it the earthquake or is it the internal quake, the body inside? Because if it's like that, we had an earthquake now and then, it's something get enlightened. So, do you understand my question?
If we're talking about the kind of thing they talk about in the scriptures, the kind of earthquake that would happen when they say the earth shook or the earth was shaken by the enlightenment of the Buddha, we're talking about the experience of the human mind penetrating the Four Noble Truths, becoming enlightened. That's a very special experience, a very powerful experience. But on the mental level, it's a mental thing, it's a purification of the mind. You could sort of describe it as sort of the mind spreading out this amazing power of the enlightened mind, the purified mind spreading outwards. So it has a sort of an effect, a ripple around the universe. But this is a mental thing. There would be no destruction not in the normal, these kind of earthquakes we have where, lots of destruction. It's not the same as that, no.